Hi, thanks for tuning in. This is the US Futures Weekly Chart Analysis for the week ending 11th of April 2025. First chart is the US Dollar Index Futures. You can see that price has been quite volatile this week, the very wide spread. Volume was also very high, which accompanied that very wide spread. Just so you know where we are, in the green is the longer term trading range. We've got a resistance zone above and kind of a vacuum in between where supply is expected to be a bit reduced compared to the two zones above and below it. This week price dipped lower and has actually closed below the longer term trading range at around the 100 level. You can see the close off the low where the markets made some recovery, and I expect will attempt to recover back into this trading range. A complete breakdown below this level would be pretty serious for this market and the associated markets, as you'll see with just this week's move lower. So at this point, price has moved down to the lows of the trading range. I expect at least an attempt to hold on at this level. But we'll see what the response is next week, as it will be quite important. This is the E-mini S&P 500 index futures. And you can see on this chart, the market did move below the previous close this week, but it's recovered quite strongly to close well up within the range of the previous bar. You've got the two important levels up here. You can see where price has broken down here and then broken down here. And price is in recovery mode this week. Buying support did emerge, and pretty strong buying support. It's well above average volume, a little below the recent volumes, but still quite strong volume, and the market's recovered on that, or at least attempted to recover on that. I would expect some sideways trading in here in response, some testing for supply and absorption like this. These are daily bars on a weekly chart. In response, in an attempt to recover and reset after this quite strong volatility. US Treasury 10-year note futures also were quite volatile this week with a very wide spread. Price was down, yields were up. You can see here the market attempted to break out. Supply was drawn out in the top of this bar, and prices moved lower in response. It's pushed down. This is a fairly important level here where the market attempted to move below previously but saw buying support emerge, and the price recovered quite well from that point on. We're getting down close to that level again now. So I expect the market will make some attempt to find support around this level here, just above or below that 108 level. Copper price futures. Copper price futures saw a narrowing spread this week. It's far reduced over the previous bar spread, but volume was higher and well above average, and the market recovered on that high volume. It did dip below the previous bar's low and tested the strength of the market below it, and the market rejected going lower and instead recovered and saw buying support emerge. This is a sign of underlying strength for the market. It may take a little while for it to completely work its way through, but there was buying support drawn out this week. If we just go back onto the chart and draw some lines in, you can see back here where some buying support emerged and the market built up some strength, and there was a breakout, push up to a new level, secondary breakout. There's another breakout up here. Market moved up, weakness emerged on this bar here, price pulled back in response, and now we've had an attempt to support the market this week. Similar to the previous markets, I would expect some sideways trading here and further recovery. It's less likely the market will really accelerate higher in the near term. Much more likely the market will test for supply, absorb supply, and then make a push out at a slightly later date. Now, whether this is just early next week and the market pushes out later in the week, that remains to be seen. But you wouldn't expect an immediate recovery early next week. Gold price futures. Gold price futures have been on a real tear for quite some time now. Back here we saw some consolidation and some strength being built in the market. Price did push out and took the form of bullish absorption through here. There was a little period of consolidation across here before the market pushed higher again. This is where the weakness emerged on the broader markets. The price didn't really move very low here. There was good buying support in the market. You can see volume was high, but price did not push very much lower. It didn't really even push lower than the previous bar's low there. So that's a good sign of strength for the market. There was a test below this week's low this week, and price recovered strongly to push up to new highs. Volume was pretty high, above average. It was a little lower than the previous 2 weeks' average, but still good, strong volume. And with the price action showing a recovery and buying support coming in, that's good, strong, high volume supporting the push higher. Silver price futures. Silver price futures built up some strength, similar to those other markets back here. There was a push out, a retest of the breakout line before the market pushed out again. Here was the new highs being made up here. Price broke down in line with the broader market. There was a test below the previous bar's low before the market recovered this week on good, strong volume. This was also a good response to the market, and you would expect early next week at least a test for supply and perhaps some absorption before the market makes a secondary attempt to push higher. Like crude price futures, we're threatening to break down last week. Here's the lows of the original range. Here's the previous support. This is last gasp support here. The market was threatening to move below it last week. It didn't really get confirmation this week. It did initially push lower, but a recovery took place and price really closed adjacent to the previous bar's close. So there wasn't confirmation of the breakdown. I think you'll probably see the market attempt to recover here. I expect there will be a failure at this level and market will come back down again. We'll see. I don't feel the market's strong enough to move up and break through this breakdown line here above 65. But there has been a recovery this week. The volume is very high, so this is a strong recovery. This is good, strong buying support emerging in the market. So perhaps after a little sideways period of consolidation, there will be an attempt to break above 65. It remains to be seen, but there's no doubt that good, strong buying support emerged this week. Now we're into the currency futures. This is the Euro-US dollar currency pair. Back here, we saw the market attempting to break down, but there was a reluctance to move lower down here and some buying support emerged. In response, price pushed up. There was a period of consolidation before there was a strong breakout. And remember, this market trades the inverse of the US dollar to a large extent. So as the US dollar has been moving lower, this market's been moving higher. There was a breakout here, a period of consolidation in response. An attempt to break out last week where some supply was drawn out in the top of the bar in here. And then after a brief test for supply below the previous bar's close, the market accelerated higher this week. There was a close off the highs again, so you may see some testing for supply early next week. That would make some sense as the US dollar attempts to recover. And then we'll see what the response is following that. But I expect this market to test for supply very early next week, Monday, Tuesday. British pound currency futures, similar to the euro to a large extent, although the attempt to break down here was a much stronger attempt. There was buying support emerge in this bar here. You can see that with the volume and the narrowing spread. Price pushed higher in response. There was a period of consolidation before a minor breakout and then a secondary consolidation. Here was the stronger breakout, similar to the euro. Price pushed up. There was a period of consolidation in response. Some supply was drawn out on this bar, but it wasn't particularly strong, as following a test for supply, the market pushed higher this week and above this breakout line. So while it's not as strong as the euro, it's certainly still trading the inverse of the US dollar, and it's looking relatively strong. Japanese yen currency futures, similar to the previous charts to some extent. There was a period of consolidation and a building of strength down here. The market broke out on this bar, and after 1 week's consolidation, broke out a second time. There was another little push higher here before some further consolidation took place through here. And then the market attempted to break out last week, but did draw out some supply. And then following a test for supply early this week, the market's pushed higher and moved above this breakout line. And it's trading adjacent to the previous highs to some extent, which will come through here. So it's not quite up to them yet, but it's moving up towards them. There was a little supply drawn out this week. So I imagine you'll get some testing for supply early in this market as well next week, which will correspond nicely with a little bit of strength that I expect to see early in the US dollar next week as that market attempts to recover back above the 100 level on the US dollar index. Aussie dollar currency futures were much stronger than they have been more recently. Last week we saw the market break right down and down to a new price level. This is the highs of a previous support level below. The market pushed down to this level last week. There was a test for supply below the previous bar's close early in the week, and then a strong recovery as the weakness in the US dollar emerged. Perhaps a little stronger than expected, and back above the 62 cent level and back adjacent to this previous congestion. The highs of the range come through there. The lows of the range are really at the 62 level, the low of this bar. You could put last gasp lows down here, but the true lows probably come through there like that. So prices moved back up adjacent to the previous trading and around the centre of the older trading range. I expect, along with the rest of the market, or the rest of the currencies at least, some testing for supply and possibly some absorption early next week. And then we'll see how much supply is drawn out and how the US dollar trades to some extent, because these markets are all trading the inverse of the US dollar, at least to some extent. There is some local fundamental characteristics added to that, but they trade the inverse of the US dollar to a large extent. Bitcoin futures. Bitcoin futures are continuing to consolidate sideways. We saw a breakout way back here and then a push higher. a week's consolidation in here before the market established new highs. Supply was drawn out up here. The market attempted to absorb that supply, but eventually it did break down. The supply won out, and the market has come back to this level where it's currently trading, just above the 80,000 level, and it's attempting to consolidate again. This is a secondary consolidation following this period up here where supply was drawn out at the highs, and the supply was quite high. If you look at the volumes on this bar and this bar, it's pretty high. So there was supply drawn out up there, and following a failed period of consolidation, the market's moved back and it's making a secondary attempt to consolidate down here. There was a little bit more supply drawn out this week, which was a little disappointing, because what you want to see is very low volumes as price moves lower like this and then recovers. So to have an increase in volume this week was a little disconcerting and not what you'd like to see, really. That may mean there'll be some further sideways consolidation required. It may also mean that the market's preparing to push higher, and the recovery was part of that push higher. We'll just have to wait and see how the market trades early next week in response for a clearer picture on just how this market is going to trade. But at least initially, the increase in volume this week is a little disconcerting. Back to the US dollar index futures, just quickly. You can see the market has dipped below the lows of the older trading range down here. There was some support emerge in the market as the close was off the week's low. I would expect an attempt to recover next week back within the range of the previous support. You'd really call this last gasp support down here. The true lows were coming through just a little bit above that. So this was a little bit of a overshoot to the downside before a recovery down here. The lows are really down here like that. So I would expect an attempt to recover next week, and you'll see the associated currencies probably testing for supply as this market attempts to move higher. And then we'll see just how much supply is drawn out in response, whether this market can recover back into the green zone of previous support, or whether there's a further attempt to break down. A push below this week's bar's low would certainly be a serious negative for this market. Okay, thanks for your time. Back again next week. See ya.